Welcome back to Femme Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Portela, and today we are searching for a Demogorgon in the Upside Down. But before we dive into today's episode, let me tell you how you can follow and support the pod. You can, of course, subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. However, this episode and then Friday's episode will be the last episodes you can get on Spotify before we are off Spotify. You can get your podcast anywhere else that you get a podcast, you can find the podcast there. You can find it on YouTube, or if you would like some other free options, you can get it on Substack. You can get it on Patreon. All of this is linked in the show notes, but for example, you can also get it on Apple, you can get it on iHeartRadio, all of that stuff, just anywhere but Spotify after Friday, okay? So if you are somebody who listens to this on Spotify, make sure you have a plan to find the podcast elsewhere in the world, if you would like. All right, you can also follow the podcast on Instagram and TikTok at Femme Furious Pod. You can send me your thoughts, feelings, opinions in an email at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. And of course, you can stay up to date with everything that's happening on the podcast, plus some, with our free newsletter for you. It's a monthly newsletter called Lipstick and Lore. Okay, let's dive into today's Chic Peek as we take a look at Season 5, Episode 2. Here's your general spoiler warning for this episode of the podcast. We are talking about everything from Stranger Things. We are not, however, talking about episodes 3 and 4 from this binge drop. We will be talking about those in subsequent weeks on Tuesdays. That will lead us up into the Volume 2 drop. We are also not talking about the stage play. I will probably talk about the stage play a little bit more next episode or episode 4, but it will be in sort of its own section. So if you do not want to be spoiled about the play, no worries, okay? The name of this episode, which has been long theorized by fans before the episode title was released, is The Vanishing of Holly Wheeler. It is written and directed by the Duffer Brothers. Vibe check. Let's get traumatized. This was such a traumatizing episode for no reason. The feral factor is a 7 out of 10, and it's a 7 out of 10 mostly because the action in this episode is actually really great, and it would have been much higher for me except for the fact that I'm fucking sick and tired of the Duffer Brothers continuously chickening out of killing people of consequence in this show. Who is this episode for? It's for my girlies who love a trauma bond. If you liked the book Kiss of the Basilisk, you will like this episode, and I will not be explaining further. If you have anything in your home decor that includes the word wine or wine o'clock, you will like this episode. And, of course, anyone that is secretly hoping that when, not if, we go back in time, Karen Wheeler will finally get her back blown out by Billy, you will like this episode. Here's my hot girl hot take for this episode. This episode is a masterclass in parental oblivion. The audience is already at the finish line in this episode. The kids are sprinting the marathon, and the parents are just stretching in the parking lot. All right, babes. Let's jump into this week's Femme Frame, where we will dive into key feminist themes, history, cultural context, and more. Let's do some time traveling of our own in this episode and take a trip back to 1944 to East Orange, New Jersey, a place where a group of high school girls accidentally created one of the most iconic symbols of American girlhood, the candy striper. According to Prospect Medical Holdings, it all started as a civics class project at East Orange General Hospital. The girls designed a red and white striped outfit, then stitched them by hand and volunteered to help the nurses with the endless emotional labor a hospital requires. Even though these outfits were incredibly iconic, these girls were stepping into real care work, and they were doing it for free. From there, just spread quickly. Hospitals across the country wanted their own stripe-clad girls, manning the wards, delivering flowers, reading stories, and soothing anxious patients. As the Wikipedia entry on hospital volunteer notes, the aesthetic, the literal red and white stripes, became synonymous with compassion, service, and cheerful girl energy. But as many things in history, there of course is a gender gap, because the candy stripers weren't just volunteers, They were America's first mass-marketed, institutionalized version of good girl labor. The whole program relied on the assumption that teenage girls were naturally empathetic, naturally nurturing, and naturally happy to give their time away, all because it looked cute and wholesome. Spiegatto's breakdown of the role points out that the candy stripers were assigned tasks that required emotional intelligence, patience, and relational labor, but not authority, which kept them in a supportive role but not a professional one. Look, these girls did amazing, meaningful work, but the cultural framing was a little loaded. Now, it's important to remember that candy stripers came to the national stage during World War II, a time when many women, especially nurses, were being shipped off to the front in order to help with the overwhelming injuries that were happening because of the war. And so our hospitals here domestically in America, they needed some support. The candy stripers are under a heavy influence of everything that is happening on the global stage, even down to the pattern and the way that these uniforms were made. So as Sci-Fi Dimension notes, the candy stripe pattern wasn't just affordable, which was important at the time because we're working with scrap materials during the war. We're not able to spend as much on fabric because all of this stuff is either imported or even if it's made domestically, it's stuff that is getting shipped out to the front. We've talked about this on the podcast before. We've talked about how fashion has been influenced by wars, in particular World War II. But in this case, the fact that these uniforms were affordable was just one benefit, but the fact that they became symbolic then, signaling the youthful femininity and the harmlessness of girls, and having something that is, named after a candy and made to be sweet is a part of the legacy that has come with a candy striper. Candy stripers reflect a long history of women's unpaid labor being romanticized rather than compensated. The war was one of the first times that women could enter the military in any capacity. This happened in 1901. It is repeated in 1941, and it's like officiated by President Roosevelt during the middle of the war for women to be able to be considered army nurses or navy nurses. So one of my favorite modern sources dives into this. It's the St. Jude's blog, where a former 1968 candy striper remembers that being a teen who volunteered was a way to get close to medicine. But even then, because girls couldn't be doctors and they couldn't technically be nurses yet outside of the war, they could only orbit around these roles. They could be helpful, they could learn something, they could observe something, but they could never be in charge. They could never be in the actual capacity to influence or make a difference or have a job in any of these positions. And so this was a way for women to get close to these roles of medicine. Even the eventual decline of the candy striper tells a gendered story. So WSOC TV and CBS News both highlight that as hospital rules began to modernize, meaning that there were stricter infection protocols, there was more formalized training, there was liability concerns, the old programming failed. But what didn't fade was the idea that young women could still be the emotional backbone of care work just without the cute uniform. Today, many hospitals still have junior volunteer programs. WVU Medicine, according to the Dominion Post, explicitly connects their teen volunteers to the legacy of what candy stripers were supposed to do, minus, again, the cute uniform. But the gender imbalance remains, which brings us back to the heart of this femme frame. Candy stripers aren't just retro nostalgia or cute Halloween costumes, although both. They're a window into how society has historically trained girls to become default caregivers. They are connecting women and girls to the idea of empathy, compliancy, pleasantry, all of that good stuff. And how the dynamic of that still shifts our expectations of women and femme people today. But there's also something else that's powerful here, because the Candy Striper program accidentally gave generations of girls access to medical spaces that they may never have had access to if it wasn't for the creation of this program. For many, including the St. Jude volunteer mentioned earlier, it was a gateway to agency, to ambition, and to imagining themselves in rooms that were traditionally closed off to them and only offered to men. So it's duality. It's the duality for me. It's the sweet packaging, naming it after a candy, making it these very femme forward uniforms, and then there is like the sharp truth underneath it, which is there is a plight or a mission in girls creating this program in order to give themselves access to education, resources, material, knowledge that they would not have had if they did not create this program to begin with. So the next time you see a red and white stripe aesthetic, or you think about the girl labor that holds the entire industry of medical systems afloat, remember this, that candy stripers weren't just a simple creation. They were a feminist origin story that was wrapped in a pinafore. The story of girls that were stepping up during a national crisis, doing the work that no one else wanted to do and doing it well, while onlookers insisted that it was cute. Now, how did we get here in Stranger Things? Great question. This is in reference to, in this episode, the fact that Nancy is denied again and again and again and again into being able to go see her mother. And we already got this in season 3, where she has to continuously lie about being Mrs. Driscoll's granddaughter in order to go visit her and continue her investigative journalism. And now, once again, she is a direct relative to the person that's in the hospital, and yet she's still being denied, and she concocts this plan through the guise of the candy striper because they're going unnoticed in the hospital. And I just thought, where did the candy striper come from? Like, why did it sort of die out? Where did it begin? And I'm gonna be honest, there wasn't like a ton of information on this, but the candy striper is something that you see quite often in these retro sort of TV shows or retro movies, and I just thought it would be interesting. And I didn't know that it was originated during the 1980s, during World War II, and that seems to make sense to me as far as like timing goes. And then it's also just interesting why these roles pop up and what their influence is over women over time. So it was Nancy Wheeler, the condescending doctor, and the hospital that led us to this clue conclusion. Okay, let's go into our Slay by Slay, where we will deep dive into everything that happens into this episode. And I have a few really cool beats that I would love to talk about today, so hang tight because I think this is going to be a great episode. Let's start with where the episode starts, which is the demo attack. So obviously we pick up right where we left off. And what killed me about this scene with the Demogorgon is that Holly then runs to go to Karen. And in episode 1, we witness Holly sitting on the stairs listening to her parents argue about her relationship with Mr. Whatsit. And she's just witnessed her mom having an argument with her dad about not believing this experience that she's having. We know from Holly's POV that she can actually see Mr. Whatsit. We also know that from an adult's perspective or an outsider's perspective that they cannot. However, it's also very clear that while Mike engages Holly with Mr. Whatsit and asks questions and is trying to understand Holly a little bit better through her relationship with Mr. Whatsit, it's also very clear that Karen doesn't do that and finds something to be wrong with her. And so Holly overhears this. Holly overhears her mom saying, sure, it's normal to have an imaginary friend if she was 5, Ted, but she's no longer 5. You don't even know how old your daughter is. And while that line is sort of a throwaway line for us, the audience, because now Holly is being played by a 13-year-old girl and is supposed to clearly be like 10, maybe 9 or 10 at this point, it's really obvious that Holly is taking this on that her mom doesn't believe her and what that does to you as a kid. And so when Holly runs into the bathroom, into her mom's room, and she says to her mom, please trust me, please believe me, I was absolutely gutted because there is something so innocent about this. And you know that she's telling the truth about Mr. Whatsit. We see from her perspective that she sees somebody. And you also know that she's telling the truth about this Demogorgon. And not that she would know what to call it. But the fact that she knows that Karen doesn't believe her, and so she's begging Karen until Karen feels the blood on the back of her head and notices that something's wrong. And then obviously at that point, like, the Demogorgon is just right on top of them, to me is one of the most critical scenes about what we will acknowledge moving forward from the adult's perspective versus the children's perspective. And in particular, what Holly's relationship to the adults around her is going to be. Now, like, I've seen some takes online where they're like, Holly, you know, with her easy bake oven, basically, after her parents just got, like, slashed by monsters. But, you know, we see that Henry / Vecna / One is trying to console her and being like, we're going to get the kids first and then we're going to get the adults. But would you really blame Holly for not being all that concerned about her brother and sister that she really has zero relationship with? Maybe Mike more than Nancy at this point, based off of what we've seen just from episode 1. Not concerned about her siblings at all, but is mildly concerned about her parents. But, like, can you blame her for not being overly concerned about her parents when she's just witnessed her parents not believe her? They're convinced just based off of their lived experience, in particular her mom. So I don't know, it's just something to think about, like, what her relationship or what her intrigue or how this will change the dynamic of what her relationship is with her parents moving forward. We then get the shot of Holly and Karen underwater, which is something that we glimpsed from Vecna's premonition to Nancy in season 4. But in this Demogorgon attack, I want to talk about the Demogorgon for a second, because I'm kind of confused about the Demogorgon, and it feels like season 5 in many ways is retconning a lot of stuff that happened in earlier seasons just to make the story make sense. And that to me feels a little insatiating, considering how thoughtful the story has been since season 1. Here's why I'm slightly confused. When we are in season 1, the vibe of the Demogorgon is animalistic, primal. We were speculating in season 1 with Nancy and Jonathan that the Demogorgon is attracted to blood, like Jaws, like a shark. I don't necessarily know if that's true or not true, but it's something that they were theorizing about in the show. So they were pointing us in the direction of, like, hey, the blood attracts the animal, okay? And that's how we're supposed to be seeing the Demogorgon, as sort of animalistic. You know, Dart can't help but to kill Muse in season 2, right? They're trying to trap Dart with bloody, raw pieces of meat that they're chucking down as bait to get it to follow them. So we've seen the sort of experience of the Demogorgon be something that is completely animalistic in seasons prior. And even in the killing of Bob, right? Like, it's a gory death. They're just like, jump on top of him and they start, you know, attacking him and eating him, basically. That this animal is supposed to be almost like a raptor, right? From Jurassic Park. Like, it just smells your fear and it's gonna eat you raw. And what I don't understand is that in episode 1 of this season, we see the Demogorgon chasing Will. Has enough control not to eat it. Okay, he's not eating Will. He's got enough control not to eat Will. Then Will gets knocked out. The Demogorgon drags it to Vecna's lair and, like, bows and leaves. So there's something in the Demogorgon that realizes a chain of command, a hierarchy within the Upside Down. There is something about the Demogorgon that is sentient and feeling beyond just primal instinct. And we see it again here in this attack on Holly, because he doesn't kill. I don't know why I'm calling the Demogorgon he. I'm sorry. This is like a feminist show. She does not kill. She does not kill Ted. She sort of just knocks Ted out of the way. She does not kill Karen. She definitely fucks her up. It's a girl fight. She's got her nails done and slashes, okay, at Karen Wheeler, but again, not a kill shot, and then has enough cognizance with all of this blood around that we're supposed to see, like, makes these Demogorgons feral, has enough wherewithal not to eat Karen, not to eat Ted, and then to drag Holly Wheeler into the Upside Down without eating or attacking Holly in any capacity. So I'm just confused about the role of the Demogorgon. Now, we've heard from Dustin in seasons prior, the Mind Flayer is the top guy, Vecna is his 5-star general, the Demogorgon is the foot soldier. We're getting that here. It's the foot soldier. It's bringing it to Vecna. It's bringing it to, the Upside Down. The Demogorgon being a powerful foot soldier because it can open dimension doors, which I think is important. But, like, not understanding at all, me as a human, am not comprehending what the Demogorgon's level of intelligence is. And I know that the Demogorgons are connected to the hive mind, but does that mean that the hive mind is influencing the level of intelligence and subduing its primal instinct in order to make it more subservient to Vecna / potentially the Mind Flayer? I'm not sure if the Duffers want us to be thinking so deeply about this, and yet I am who I am. So accept me or don't. But this is what I'm thinking about, because season 5, the Demogorgon just seems much more humanoid than it has in seasons prior. In this scene as well, we finally get Ted Wheeler doing something other than serving Snark, which I really enjoy. We also get Karen Wheeler with the wine bottle, drunk in the kitchen. Once again, another clue mystery solved. I will say, though, she gets in a bunch of bloody hits, and there's something in this energy that I feel is supposed to be, I don't really know if I'm going to say it's a Harry Potter comp. I mean, I think there is a lot of Harry Potter influence as like a pop culture influence on the story that we are telling in Stranger Things, particularly the relationship between Will and Vecna. But like here in like a don't touch my daughter type of way, reminds me of, Molly Weasley versus Bellatrix Lestrange, where she calls Bellatrix a bitch, which she is, and many other moments that are sort of derived from that, where we get these experiences of like, don't touch my daughter, a mother protecting the daughter. And I really loved this moment, and I really thought it was brave. The scene for me in the moment was a 12 out of 10. Like, watching it the first time through, like going from episode 1 to episode 2, like the easiest, just keep the binge going for me in a really long time. However, on a rewatch, I was like, I'm tired of Stranger Things toying with death only for everyone to beat the odds every single time. And the only time that we've seen characters die are like these transient characters that are not super significant to the story, but that become a fabric of like whatever season we're in. So, in season 1, we know that Will's not dead, but we sort of get this like fake out of like Will's death. And then at the end of the season, we get Eleven's death, but then it's not her death. We see her kind of come back and she's peeking through the window. Then in season 2, we get introduced to Bob. Bob Newby, he's great. We love him. He dies. Then in season 3, we've got Billy, who dies. Season 4, it's Eddie, who's only introduced to us in the beginning of the season. We fall in love with him and then he dies. And like, this just continues to happen. Like, there's a fake out between season 3 and season 4 of like Hopper's death. We had like theorized on the internet that he's probably not dead, but how could that be? And all of this stuff. And then he comes back and it's just like too many deaths that are not deaths. I forgot Alexi in season 3 too. Like, we really loved Alexi for like all 3 episodes that he was in there. And then he died. But it just is like, once again, like, you could have killed Ted or Karen. You could have made either one of those people die, especially Karen in particular, because we are more invested in Karen as a character, but she's not integral to the plot of the story, to our knowledge, at least, or she hasn't been all of this time. And so, like, in the immediacy of like all of this stuff is happening and all of the emotional beats and the action beats of this episode, particularly in this scene when we're getting the fight with the Demogorgon, I was so into it the first time around, and then coming back to it and knowing by the end of this episode that no one actually dies was like a cheap cop-out to me. I'm not saying that somebody has to die for the emotional stakes of a show to be high, because I don't believe that at all, and I don't believe that in books, and I don't believe that in storytelling. I think it's when there's this constant like walking to the edge and then walking it backwards so that we're feeling something strong and then we're being pulled back from it or reeled back from it. Nothing for nothing, but in the book community, Sarah J. Maas does this a lot too, especially in ACOTAR. In ACOTAR, every main character dies and comes back. And it's frustrating. It takes something away from you as a viewer in story to be able to just rely on the fact that your characters are going to be there, even though they're constantly being threatened with these supernatural forces or these magical forces. And I wouldn't care if Stranger Things balked at this and was like, there's going to be a happy ending and everyone's going to make it out of this alive. I wouldn't mind that at all if they just didn't constantly tease it. There is something to be said about knowing that your characters are going to be facing trials and tribulations or be facing situations that are difficult to get out of, and knowing that they will, and those being the tension stakes or the stakes being high for other reasons, but knowing that they will be able to get out of it, instead of just saying, like, putting us through this incredible Demogorgon attack only for Karen and Ted to be completely alive and completely fine. I mean, Ted's in a coma, but Karen's fine, really. She's going to need some healing. Stuff is going to be healing in her body. She got really lacerated up here on her upper body when that Demogorgon swiped at her. But, like, she's fine. She's totally fine. She will heal. The body heals. There's no real stakes then in fighting the Demogorgon when in other seasons, how could I forget in season 1 that Barb died? When there's no real stakes for the death other than characters that we're not 100% invested in, like Barb, like a Billy. I'm not saying we're not invested in Billy. I'm just saying, like, a Billy death is not the same as a Steve Harrington death or a Dustin death or a Mike death. And we don't need those characters to die to have the stakes be important, but to just constantly swing and miss feels to me. So, like, watching this episode on like a rewatch, I was like, all right. I wasn't as enamored as I think I was the first time around in the emotional beats of the episode and being taken into the episode the way that I was. So it's also important to note that at the end of this scene, Nancy and Elle arrive to the house and Elle slips into the Upside Down to go hunt the Demogorgon and find Holly. Then we go into the hospital, and I really, really, really want to talk about the scene between Nancy, Will, and Lucas, because there is a lot here. The meat of this episode is in these next couple of minutes, so hang out with me as we sort of dive into this particular scene, because this is the scene that was the most fascinating to me, and it's what took me the longest to get through this episode, because I kept pausing it so that I could write down all of the quotes. So first and foremost, Nancy's guilt, the trauma, the blood on her hands that she has from her mom that we see her washing off, and it gets like more and more frantic as she's like pushing for soap, trying to clean it off. Her clothes are bloodstained, all of this stuff. That guilt that she's feeling is directly from the blood that she feels is on her hands from Barb. It is the blood and the guilt that she has from Barb actualized with her parents, and in particular her mom. And in her mini argument with Mike that she has in the hospital about them not forewarning their parents or families about what is going on with these other stranger things in the Upside Down, that's valid, because Nancy goes on to say, Vecna told me this would happen. He showed me, and not just the 4 gates. Holly, Dad, Mom, dead. Now, I'm going to pause here to say that in that flashback, in that premonition that we get from Vecna in season 4, Mike was also included with that, but whatever, they decided to change this and just make it that it was just the 3 of them, okay? Nancy goes on to say, and we chose not to believe him, but now it's all coming true. Like, don't you get it, Mike? Vecna's come back to realize his vision. to punish us. So I thought this language was really interesting because Vecna, to our knowledge thus far, has only penetrated the people's minds who are experiencing deep trauma, grief, or pain. At least that is what we can understand about him from season 4. He gets into the 4 people that open the gate, including then Nancy, whose mind he penetrates while they're trying to fight Vecna in the end of the season. And this is where he says, like, I will expose the truth to you. And we see that he does this Chrissy and her mom, and like the tormenting that her mom does and puts her through, the bullying that her mom puts her through. We see this with Max's own grief with Billy, but we also see it with Vecna, and he torments Nancy in season 4 with the truth about the Creoles and this truth that she's been poking and prodding at, that she's trying to like figure out and put together as the journalist that she is. And then in season 5, we're understanding that he's taking children because their minds are more malleable. So something that we will explore like a little bit more in other episodes, but we're focusing specifically on the way that Vecna enters people's minds in season 4, okay? People that are going through deep trauma, deep grief, or a lot of pain. And we know that Nancy is one of those people, even though she wasn't one of the kills. So he has entered her mind. Important to note, important to understand, important to remember. Because I don't think Nancy is safe. I think Nancy has been penetrated by Vecna. Not in the good way. Not in the Vecna-y kind of way. Now we know that since season 1, Nancy has been harboring strong guilt about Barb's death. Which, A, makes me nervous for Nancy's safety because she has been penetrated by Vecna. But B, Lisai is making me think that we will see more of Barb this season, especially because the actress who played Barb was at the season premiere. More on that another time, another place. I think that will be in volume 2, okay? That's my little prediction. I'm not sure about that. We've seen Barb every season. We've just seen like her cold dead corpse in every season, like through B-roll footage. So it's not like the actress has like made an appearance. However, her character has obviously been critical across all 4 seasons as far as like Nancy's trajectory. And so then it cuts to Lucas, who cuts into Nancy's speech after that and says, I'm not sure this is about punishment. So before I get into Lucas and what he says and what this means, I want to talk about the fact that Nancy is telling us here that she feels she deserves to be punished because of what happened to Barb, because of now what has happened to Holly, her dad, and her mom. Okay. Lucas then says, why take Holly into the Upside Down and not leave her body here for you to find? Why not come here himself? Why send one of his pets, meaning the Demogorgon? To which Mike responds, what are you saying? It's not Vecna? And Lucas replies, I don't know, and neither do you. I just know that I'm having serious deja vu because this is exactly what happened to Will at almost exactly the same time. And then he finishes this speech with, I don't believe in coincidences. Great. Neither do I. So let's dissect a few things from this entire monologue experience. Number 1, why would Lucas doubt in any capacity, given the events from season 4 that they just lived through with Max, that this is not Vecna's work? The fact that the statement is in there, the fact that he says, I don't know that this is Vecna and neither do you, is leading me to believe we should still consider other options for a big bad. In particular, we should be considering the Mind Flayer. Why? Because of that hierarchy that we get from Dustin. The Demogorgon is the foot soldier, Vecna is the 5-star general, the Mind Flayer is the big bad. Okay? We also have confirmation from the Duffer Brothers that in season 1, when Will was taken, it was the work of the Demogorgon, meaning that thing that we see, the chirping that we hear, all of the lights flashing, the disappearance, all of that stuff, the person that was taking him, the entity that was taking him, rather, it's not a person, was the Demogorgon. Though, they also confirmed that the unlatching of the chain inside the house that Will had put on was not the Demogorgon because that is not in his scope of powers. So we know that there was some sort of psionic influence. However, we don't know what that is, but we know that this has been theorized about, and then we know that the Duffers then confirmed this online. The other thing is, we also know that Vecna has not been into Hawkins since Elle pushed him through the portal. Why do we know this? because in season 1, the Demogorgon came through into our world. Maybe Vecna used the hive mind to enhance its telekinetic powers, take over, and use it in order to open the door. Or maybe he comes through, or maybe there's something else, which we will speculate in other episodes. So keep listening to the podcast if you want to hear other theories, but they're not correlated to like this particular episode. We also have confirmation that the Demogorgon is what is chasing Will and bringing him into the Upside Down to bring him to Vecna. Okay, great. We have all of that between season 1, the Duffer Brothers, and information that we have from the season premiere of this episode, this season 5. In season 2, the Mind Flayer reaches briefly through the Mother Gate towards Elle. We see that as she's closing the Mother Gate, it's like little smoke hand kind of comes out. Okay? The Mind Flayer reaches through the Mother Gate towards Elle, but it is sealed behind the wall, pushed back eventually by Elle, and then sealed behind the Mother Gate. Then the final shot of that season in season 2 is all of the kids at the snowball dance and then it flipping into the Upside Down where we see Hawkins Middle School and we see the Mind Flayer like over the school stalking the kids. Like the creeper that it fucking is. So far, season 1, we have learned that it's not Vecna. Season 2, it's the Mind Flayer. Nothing about Vecna has been in the world that we know of thus far. Season 3, the small bit of the Mind Flayer that was in Will possesses Billy and uses Billy as the host, similar to how it used Will in season 2. So none of this is Vecna being in our world, okay? And then in season 4, we get the Vecna reveal with no mention of the Mind Flayer connection at all, other than seeing the shot of Henry give a shape to the Mind Flayer, similar to the Black Widow spiders. But when Vecna attacks in season 4, he is attacking inside the Upside Down through his mind palace. He is not coming through any sort of portal into our world. We know that this is why he is after Elle's powers, because he wants to be able to open a door. When he can't use Elle's powers, they close the gate in season 2, okay? In season 3, they seek their own means to open a gate, open a portal, and that's what is realized in season 4, is they open this sort of hell gate or this hell mouth into the Upside Down. But that is why he's after her powers to begin with, is because Elle has the power to rip a portal through time and space to send Vecna into the dimension of the Upside Down. So from what we know, everything that has been come through into our modern world in Hawkins has either been particles of the Mind Flayer, the Demogorgon, or a possession through another person via the Mind Flayer, or a possession through another person via Vecna inside the Upside Down. Vecna is not crossing into our world to do that. So if there's no coincidences, to me, that is like a Chekhov's gun, okay? And if you don't know what a Chekhov's gun is, sorry, but I went to school for theater and read every Chekhov play that you could ever possibly imagine multiple times in my course of studies. Did I study Chekhov specifically? No. Does it feel like I got a degree in Chekhov in particular? Yes. Okay, anyway, Chekhov's gun. It's a tactic that is deployed by Chekhov where nothing that is introduced into the story lacks meaning. So if a candelabra is introduced, it will come back later in some capacity or another. The fact that Lucas is saying there is no coincidences here, the fact that Nancy feels that she is being punished makes me feel that she is going to be targeted by Vecna. I'm concerned for Nancy's safety. Okay. But the fact that Lucas even speculates that this is not Vecna makes me think that we should be paying much more attention to this conversation. Because why would Lucas doubt that it's Vecna? Why would Lucas think that these things are not interconnected? And he's not saying they're not interconnected. That's not what he's saying. But he is supposed to be in this dialogue, in this one little space of dialogue, threading some doubt to us about who is behind the vanishing of these children. I don't know. It's just something that I really want to think about moving forward as we move through the rest of this season, series, etc. Then we've got Elle in the Upside Down. Elle and Hop finally reunite, and Elle is trying to track the Demogorgon. And she tells Hopper that she knows that the Demogorgon is hurt, she knows that it's bleeding, and she knows that she can track the Demogorgon. And when Hopper says, like, well, how was the Demogorgon hurt? She has this banger line, because of Karen, with her wine. And Hopper's like, what? And it reminds me of when Max and her are at the gym in Hawkins Middle School, and Max is like, are you real? How did you get here? And she's like, I piggybacked in a pizza dough freezer. I just love these sort of one-off lines that Elle has, that they're very funny, they're very quippy. I also love that Elle is smart enough to realize that she can track the Demogorgon with blood, and how to track a Demogorgon, like if it's bleeding more, it's slowing down, etc., etc. All of these little things, but she can't put a fucking sentence together. It's just sending me through the fucking roof. All right, we're flipping back into the right side up. We have Joyce and Will. So I'm trying to figure out how I feel about Joyce this season, because in seasons prior, I've really felt annoyed that she is so easily dismissed by the men around her. But Joyce's behavior is simultaneously endearing to me this season, and also quite frustrating, because on one hand I understand that she does not want to risk Will's life and put him in any more danger. On the other hand, she's not consulting her son at all. She's deliberately overriding his autonomy and his desires around his involvement in what is happening in this season. She is also like Elle's legal parent, or was, and caretaker for Elle, like to the point where Will and Jonathan called Elle their sister. They had that close of a relationship as a unit. And Elle is in the upside down right now. And like, she was saying to Hopper last week, like, she's ready. But meanwhile, like, you sort of also had a parental claim over this child, raised her to a certain degree for a certain period of time. You love her, and yet you're willing for her to risk her life and be in the upside down. And you're sort of like, okay, Holly is in the upside down. Okay, Will empathizes with Holly because he's been taken into the upside down and he knows that this does not feel good. So I just wish that Joyce, as a mother who has had her child taken, is a little bit more concerned for Holly and a little bit more concerned for her foster daughter. I need there to be some more recognition from Joyce that she's willing to risk other children's lives and just not her own. Not even her own, like she's keeping Jonathan out of it. Like Jonathan is willing to risk his life, and she is willing to let Jonathan risk his life, but not Will. And if I was Jonathan, I would be somewhat resentful of that little fact. But on the other hand, I get it that there is an age difference, perhaps, I guess, between them, but just the fact that she's so protective over Will, and I understand why she's so protective over Will, and yet willing to let everyone else around Will risk his life, feels really fucked up to me, okay? Meanwhile, the two kids that could actually do something about it, Will and Elle, are the two kids that are constantly being told to sit on the sidelines because their parents are fucking overprotective and their parents are now in a relationship. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I really, really, really wish that Will takes more control, like in volume 2, which I think will get there as his trajectory kind of goes on, even in this episode as this trajectory goes on. But just like for Will to take some more autonomy, because at least Elle is like willing to take the risk and willing to get into the fight with Hopper and like willing to go into the upside down, and she's willing to do something about it. In fact, feels obligated to do it. And we see that Will is struggling with this, that he feels obligated, but he doesn't really know how to advocate other than like the times that he is offered to take a more leading role when he says to his mom, like, I can go, I can do this thing, talking about filling in for Dustin last episode, and his mom is like, no way. So I really think the fact that, you know, we see Will starting to come into some of his autonomy in this episode is important, but just like Joyce and the way that she treats Will and the way that she's treating the situation as a mother who has had her child taken feels underwhelming to me. Then we've got Dustin and Steve. We've got their fight. We've got them in the car. This is painful. We know that Steve knows that Dustin's story is bullshit. We know that Steve knows that it was Andy and his, as he calls them, goons who beat Dustin up. Dustin refuses to admit that, sticks to his story. And in seasons past, we've had it that when Steve was paired with a character, or Dustin paired with a character in particular, we are pairing Dustin and Steve with Robin as like a way to pull her in and have us feel really affectionate towards her. And then in season 4, we're pairing Steve and Dustin with Eddie in order to have us feel warm and tender towards him. And so the way that we see Steve and Dustin as like these introductory characters to us like fast track liking somebody on the show, to see these two characters paired in this particular argument is really, really tough. We get this sort of idea where Dustin feels almost resentful for having to be the one that Steve relies on for intellectual prowess, and this frustrates him. And again, another death harbinger, Henderson harbinger here. But we also know that Steve is good at other things. He's good at caretaking. He's good at keeping the kids safe. He has been for many, many seasons. He's good at getting his face pummeled in and looking really hot while he does it, okay? And I just think that there's, you know, this tension that we feel between the two of them feels so prominent because through subtext of the story that we're getting, we haven't been with Eddie and Dustin since the end of season 4 with Eddie's death. So we know that there's been 20 months that have passed between this season 4 ending and now where we are in season 5. We get this like bit between Steve and, you know, Dustin. And they've always had bits and they've always argued, and we've always seen some sass and some snarkiness between both of these characters, but with love and almost with like a little brother annoyance or big brother annoyance. But here there's some real gut punch underneath it. There's some real weight to what is being thrown around and why it's being thrown around. And so one of those things is Steve being supportive and Steve saying, all I've done is be there for you. And what this means is the way that he has tried to clearly console his friend. And to me, this felt like an important growth point from Steve from the last time that we had this, where, you know, he doesn't really know how to console Nancy. I don't think he does a bad job of it in season 2, but he's kind of just like, well, what else are we going to do? We like can't tell the truth about this thing. And so he doesn't really know how to console or like keep up with how Nancy is feeling about this particular thing in Barb's death in season 2. We get this sort of quick line where he says, all I've done is support you, which means that for the past 20 months, we're getting some backstory that he's continuously tried to reach out again and again and again to Dustin as this thing is going on, and probably doesn't know how to handle it any better. But again, you don't really know how somebody is going to process or deal with grief. So I just thought it was interesting, and I think this fight between them is really, it just is like one of those emotional beats where you really feel it, because these are two of our favorite characters, and they're two of our favorite characters paired together. And so seeing this, and for this conversation to end with like, I don't want to talk to you, and I don't want to talk to you either, and everyone sort of like facing as far away from each other as they possibly can in this scenario, it just really hurts, right? It really is a tender spot for us as a viewer. Then we get Robin with the flux capacitor to get Will the fuck out of there, because she's like, this is going absolutely fucking nowhere. Let's get the hell out of here. She's like, the flux capacitor is down. This was really funny. It was even funnier when Joyce asks Jonathan, like, is your flux capacitor down? And Dustin turns around and gives him a look, and Jonathan's kind of got this look on his face. The fact that like all three of these people kind of turn around to like be like, what the fuck did she just say? What did Joyce just say? Is the flux capacitor down? And Joyce is there with the microphone like, hello? I thought it was really, really funny. I thought that was well played. I thought the flux capacitor was a nice little tidbit, a nice wink and nod to obviously Back to the Future. We are getting a lot of Back to the Future stuff this season. I would be shocked and dismayed if we did not have time travel in any capacity. Again, we'll talk about this later in the season, but just a little wink and nod to it now in the Back to the Future mention. We then have Elle and Hopper in the Upside Down. Elle is discovering that Hopper is grazed by a bullet from whatever happened down here before she came, and she uses Max's knowledge from season 3 when they have to disinfect her wound. So she uses Max's knowledge to help him. And then he finally tells Elle about Sarah. And we get this incredible line where he says there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity. And then finally, Elle can sort of put the pieces together that this is why he is so overprotective of her and that he's afraid to lose her. He even says it directly, like, I'm afraid to lose you. And she says, so you think Vecna will win? And he's like, that's not what I think. But he's trying to rationalize to her this like fear that he has from losing Sarah. And the fact that now Elle knows, I think, means that they can find that, you know, compromise, promise that they need to in order for him to let her in on the mission and realize that she's a teenage girl with some autonomy and actually like probably the most influential person that they have in this battle against Vecna, and / also for Elle to take it easy and not be so reckless, because it doesn't matter that there is pressure from the end of the world. It's just a part of the teenage experience to feel like you're fucking invincible. It's just how our teenage brain minds work. You have no fear of death at this point. Just none. You just have a different risk tolerance. You have a different ability to cope and deal and process risk. And so risk doesn't seem as risky as it does when you are an adult. And Ella's in this phase. It's just part of being a teenager. Sorry, teenage psychology. I'm not a teenage psychologist, and yet I know a lot about teenage psychology because I have 2 teenage sisters. There's just something about this that resonates with like the idea of being a teenager. So again, there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity. We go back to the hospital. We see the doctor absolutely patronizing Nancy, and then we see Nancy being so annoyed by it, which is #real life. And then she gets the candy hopper idea. And then she gets the candy striper idea, which is brilliant. And they go into the janitorial part of the hospital for Mike to be patient X and for Nancy to be candy striper number 1. Those are not their real names. I'm just giving them those names. The end of the episode is Elle and Hop discovering the flesh wall, which is what I'm going to be calling it. So obviously anything beyond the wall is not reachable to Elle psychically, which is why she has not been able to find Vecna remotely through their sensory deprivation tank in Hopper's cabin. It's also why she hasn't been able to find Holly, but they do discover Holly's boot outside of the wall, so they know that it's gone. The Demogorgon and Holly have gone through the meat wall, the flesh wall. The shot of the wall is very Game of Thrones-esque. So if you've never seen Game of Thrones, sorry, I'm spoiling it for you. This is a major pop culture influence, but I'm not spoiling all of Game of Thrones, by the way, but there is a part where we are all the way in the north and there is an ice wall that is being used to keep something out, but also what it is being used to keep in. Okay, great. Then there is like snow because it's an ice wall in Game of Thrones, but here it's in the upside down, so it's a flesh wall and it's gross. But we've got the mystery dandruff, as, you know, Robin puts it. So we've got this sort of like snowflake-esque looking thing, but the way that they pan and show how big the wall is, that's what made me think of Game of Thrones, because the one in Game of Thrones is fucking huge, okay? I'm also hoping that when we are now in the hospital that this isn't the end of the line that we get with Karen Wheeler. I hope this isn't the extent of what they do with her in this season. But even if it is, I really, really need to understand why the parents are so behind on everything. I realized that in the beginning of this episode, I put in my hot girl hot take that the parents are still stretching in the parking lot. And I realized now that I'm doing this episode that I was just about to talk about something that happens actually in episode 3. And I can't. So we're going to come back to this. I'm going to put a mental note to come back to why I'm so frustrated with Karen next episode. Okay? We get 2 reveals here, though, in the hospital. Number 1, we get that Henry, in addition to being number 1, to being Vecna, now has a new name, which is Mr. What's-It. So we are Henry, Vecna, on What's-It. The second reveal is that Will was seeing through Vecna's eyes when he was stalking Holly in the real world. So there's no one there. So Henry Creel in that reveal is still a consciousness projection, and how he's doing that. So we need to focus on consciousness projection and what that means and how Vecna uses this, or Henry uses this throughout the season. And that's the end of this episode, at least as far as our Slay by Slay goes. So before we wrap up today, let's crack open the burn book, where we will look at the superlatives for this episode. First and foremost, we have our Bold and Bothered Award, which is the award strictly for the Femme and the Furious. And it goes to the moment that really relays feminine rage. And this goes to one Nancy Wheeler, who says, "I don't trust doctors who smoke or call me sweetheart," which I love that line. The Shiro Award. This award goes to the baddie who is the most inspiring, or the moment that is the most empowering. And it goes to Karen Wheeler cracking a wine bottle and then pulling a cell block tango because that Demogorgon ran into her shank, and it ran into her shank 9 times. Go Karen. The Femme Fatale Award for the most smash the patriarchy moment of the episode. And it goes to Elle telling Hop that it's not impulse, it's instinct. Speak Your Truth Trophy goes to Hopper. There's a fine line between bravery and stupidity. I really, really enjoyed this line from Hopper. Honorary Heartthrob, because I'm just a girl, okay? And I want to talk about the most swoon-worthy moments. And it's always, always, forever and always going to go to Steve Harrington wanting to bring Nancy flowers. I don't care if he's stepping on Jonathan's toes. I want what Steve wants, and Steve wants Nancy, and Steve wants Nancy to be happy, and so I want what Steve wants, and Steve wants to bring her flowers. Thank you. All right, Retro Glow, best 80s nostalgia. There is a poster that we get into Rainbow Bright in this episode in Holly's room, and so I want to read you the introduction of Rainbow Bright. When the show is starting, it says, "Into the land of darkness came a little girl with a mission. After proving herself to be worthy and brave, she became known as Rainbow Bright. Now, along with her a magnificent horse Starlight and her loyal and true friends, Twink and the Color Kids, she lives far away in Rainbow Land, a wonderful land full of color and happiness. Using the power of the rainbow, her magic belt, and star sprinkles, Rainbow Bright and her friends protect Rainbow Lands by fighting off the forces of darkness and gloom." Okay. I just felt like this is maybe premonitory to what Holly will be doing, and the fact that she is able to, live in a magical land where her and her friends have happiness and color, to me is maybe foreshadowing that they will be able to open a dimension door to another place, which is my big theory. And then we've got Boombox Bliss. Now, there's not a lot of 80s songs in this episode, but I'm going to give it to the very end where we get Mr. Sandman, because once again, this is a song that is critical to Back to the Future. This is the song that is playing when Marty McFly goes back, and as he is stumbling around discovering that he is in the this song is playing, and he's sitting down in the diner, and the song is playing, and it's when he sees his mother for the first time in the past, and all of this kind of stuff. And so Mr. Sandman to me is because of the connection to time and a movie about time and going back into the past and then back into the future. This just felt critical and fun. I like the song. So thank you for listening to this week's episode of Femme Furious. If you liked this episode, share it with your friends, tag it on social media, and always feel free to subscribe, to leave a review, follow on social media, all of that stuff. The podcast is growing. And then I will be back on Friday doing an award ceremony for 2025. We're going to do the best of 2025. And until then, don't touch the flesh wall.